Imagine, if you will, it's 3:30 in the morning, the phone starts ringing, and it's the news that every cybersecurity chief dreads.
Not the ideal start to the day.
Not at all. Today, we're having a good look at something that affects everyone, from the smallest companies to the largest enterprises. What happens in those crucial hours and days after discovering a potential security breach?
A real heart-stopping moment for any organization.
You sent over some fascinating material, and we've been digging into this piece called the security response gap. It really highlights the tension between keeping things running smoothly and the need to slam on the brakes when a threat emerges.
It's that classic dilemma, isn't it? The balance between keeping the lights on and protecting the crown jewels.
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we're going to try to unpack this whole response gap thing and figure out why it matters so much.
It's not just about the technical aspects of cybersecurity, It's about how organizations make tough decisions under immense pressure. The key question this piece raises, and one we'll be exploring, is which is the bigger risk? The internal disruption of rapid security changes, maybe with less testing, or the danger of attackers exploiting a delay?
A real nail-biter, that one. Right then, let's jump right in, shall we? The document opens with this scenario, with Emily, the Chief Information Security Officer, getting that dreaded call. Her teams found company data on a dark web dump, and it seems to be linked to Analytics Plus, one of their supply chain vendors.
And of course, the immediate questions are which vendor and how certain are we? They need to be absolutely sure before taking any drastic action. But even with the vendor's denials, there's enough evidence to confirm that something's not right. It just highlights the trust we place in third parties and the potential risks that come with it.
Absolutely. And this is where the idea of the response gap comes into play. It's that time between discovering a threat and actually doing something about it. And as we'll see, that gap can be deadly.
It really can. And at the heart of this is the conflict between operational risk and security risk. It's a constant tug of war.
Right. So let's look at some of the operational risks that cause delays. There's the classic, can't this wait until our scheduled maintenance window? Always a favorite, isn't it?
Always looking for the most convenient time. And then there's the ever-present, we don't have the resources to deal with this right now.
Understandable, especially when teams are already stretched thin. But the article makes the point that these delays, however understandable, create a window of opportunity for attackers.
And we also see concerns about disrupting users. Won't this break things for everyone, they ask. And when the vendor denies the breach, well, there's a temptation to think, maybe we're overreacting, let's wait and see what they say.
Especially if they're a trusted partner. But the problem is, these hesitations prioritize operational stability over security.
Exactly. Sometimes the immediate need to keep everything ticking over overshadows the potentially catastrophic impact of a security breach.
Right, so let's delve into a real-world example. The document lays out a timeline, with all identifying details removed, of course, showing what can happen when this response gap widens. Day 1. Threat intelligence identifies a possible exposure. The security team recommends immediate action, API key rotation, credential resets, the works. And they prep a briefing for leadership.
Seems pretty sensible, doesn't it? Taking precautions, informing the right people.
But then, day 2, vendor relations contact Analytics Plus, and they flat out deny any breach. Legal wants more evidence before making any moves, and operations starts worrying about potential disruption. It's that uncertainty paralysis setting in.
Classic. Everyone wants to be absolutely sure before doing anything.
Day 3. More evidence emerges confirming the data's legitimacy, but business units are now concerned about the impact on their month-end reporting. The Change Advisory Board schedules a review for day 5, meaning even more delays.
It's the classic organizational machinery grinding into gear. Essential in normal circumstances, but in a security incident, time is of the essence.
Exactly. Then comes days 4 and 5. Testing begins in the development environment, then the test environment, all while documentation is being prepared. Very thorough, but precious time is slipping away.
While testing is important, it can't come at the expense of swift action during a live security event.
And finally, day 6. The Change Advisory Board gives the green light. With some conditions, I'm sure. They begin rotating credentials and keys, enhance monitoring, and start a forensic investigation. But we're nearly a week in at this point. The attackers have had ample time to dig in and potentially move laterally within the network.
And on day 9, that's exactly what happens. The security team discovers evidence of lateral movement, meaning the attackers have gone beyond the initial data and are establishing a persistent presence. What started as a potentially containable issue has become a full-blown breach.
So we've seen the timeline. Now let's look at the why behind these delays. The article points to three key factors. First, uncertainty paralysis. It's like that deer in the headlights effect.
When faced with ambiguity, the natural instinct is to freeze, to wait for more information. But attackers exploit that hesitation. They don't wait for perfect information. They act on opportunity.
So the lesson here is don't let the need for absolute certainty paralyze you. Act on the best available information. The second factor is competing risk frameworks. The security team is focused on the CIA triad, but operations prioritizes stability, and finance is worried about costs. It's like they're all speaking different languages.
And those different priorities often lead to friction and delays. It's crucial to align these frameworks before an incident occurs.
Absolutely. Then there's decision-making hierarchies and testing requirements. Most organizations aren't built for speed, especially when it comes to security. Changes typically go through development, testing, then production, with approvals and validation at each stage.
And while that's important for routine updates, it creates a bottleneck during security incidents.
All right, so we've identified the problem. Now let's talk about the financial case for rapid response.
It's about making it clear that effective security isn't just an expense, it's an investment.
The article cites some pretty compelling figures. IBM's 2023 report puts the global average cost of a data breach at a whopping $4.45 million. That's about 3.5 million quid for us Brits. But here's the interesting bit. Organizations with robust incident response teams and plans actually saw their breach costs reduced by almost 1.2 million quid.
Being prepared pays off.
Big time. And the Ponemon Institute found that the average time to contain a breach is a staggering 277 days, with each day costing organizations a whopping £780,000. Talk about adding insult to injury.
Speed is of the essence. Every day counts.
The UK government's own cybersecurity survey from last year found that medium-sized businesses fork out an average of 19,400 quid per incident, while larger ones pay a mind-boggling 58,170. But guess what? Organizations with mature incident response capabilities managed to slash those costs by an average of 72%. That's a massive saving.
The ROI on incident response is undeniable.
The article stresses that a delayed response doesn't just prolong the incident, it amplifies the financial impact across the board. Extended teams, forensic investigations, business disruption, regulatory fines, reputation damage, it all adds up. So the question becomes, which is a bigger risk? A bit of disruption from quick security changes, or the potentially devastating cost of a prolonged breach?
It's a no-brainer, really. Proactive action is always cheaper than cleaning up the mess afterwards. The article even mentions a telecoms client who, after a breach, found that every day of delay doubled their overall incident costs.
So time really is money when it comes to incident response. But it's not just about the financial impact, is it? There's also the regulatory side of things.
Right. Regulators are increasingly looking at how quickly organizations detect and respond to incidents.
They give an example of a financial services firm that got their regulatory fine reduced by a whopping 40% simply because they'd improved their response capabilities.
That's a huge incentive.
So the key takeaway is to position enhanced response capabilities as a business continuity investment.
Show the bean counters that it's not just about spending money, it's about saving money and stay on the right side of the regulators.
Right. So how do organizations actually close this gap between discovery and action? The article suggests some practical approaches. First up, assume breach protocols.
It's about shifting the mindset from reactive to proactive. Instead of waiting for confirmation, you act on the quality of evidence. Assume the worst and take steps accordingly.
And these protocols should include graduated response options based on the level of certainty, pre-authorized actions that don't require multiple layers of approval, clear escalation and de-escalation criteria, and documentation of the regulatory justification for those actions. They mention a client who managed to reduce their response time from 72 hours to under 4 by implementing these protocols.
That's impressive.
The next approach is tiered response models with streamlined testing. The idea is that not every alert needs the same level of response.
Exactly. It's about tailoring the response to the level of risk.
So you've got Tier 1 for immediate actions, things like enhanced monitoring or detective controls, which can be implemented with minimal or no testing and immediate authorization. Then there's Tier 2, which includes things like credential rotation or limiting access. These actions might involve some abbreviated testing in a single environment, a rollback plan just in case, and an expedited approval process.
And then Tier 3 is for the big stuff, the major system changes that require full testing across all environments and a complete change advisory board review.
The key here is to adjust the testing requirements based on the urgency and potential impact of the threat. The article mentions a financial services client who pre-configured their testing environments to reduce testing times from days to hours.
Yeah, that's clever.
The third approach is creating a dedicated rapid response authority. Essentially, it's a cross-functional team with the power to make decisions during incidents.
And avoiding those lengthy approval processes.
This team would include security leadership, operations, legal and compliance, and someone from business continuity. They'd have the authority to implement response actions without having to jump through hoops. Now, all this sounds great for large organizations, but what about smaller businesses?
The principles are the same, but the implementation needs to be scaled.
Right. For small to medium businesses, or SMBs, with maybe 10 to 250 employees, the focus should be on simplicity, streamlined decision chains, maybe a single person with the authority to greenlight actions. They could leverage cloud-based testing environments, outsource monitoring to security providers, and use template response playbooks. They give a great example of a 60-person legal firm with just one IT person who was able to respond quickly using this approach.
Proves it can be done.
For mid-sized companies with 250 to 1,000 employees, a hybrid approach might work. A mix of dedicated security staff and cross-trained personnel from other departments. They could have scheduled expedited approval meetings and used parts of their existing infrastructure for security testing.
And for enterprises, well, they have the resources for dedicated testing environments, 247 response teams, and even automated testing pipelines. But the key point is that regardless of size, preparedness and the ability to act decisively are crucial.
Now, there's often this idea that regulations hinder rapid response. The article addresses that, talking about navigating regulatory challenges.
It's a common misconception that compliance means you can't act quickly.
There's a perception that you need tons of testing and documentation before implementing any security changes. But the article emphasizes that most regulatory frameworks understand the need for emergency response.
The key is to document your decision-making process when taking swift action. It's better to act and document than to freeze out of fear of non-compliance.
They give the example of a healthcare organization that hesitated to implement security controls because of GDPR concerns. But when they looked closer at the regulations, they found that the framework actually allowed for expedited measures during suspected incidents, as long as they documented everything. The threat assessment, risk evaluation, who made the decision and why, and the post-implementation compliance validation.
So it's about understanding the nuances of the regulations.
Exactly. They also mention the idea of pre-approved regulatory pathways, which sounds very sensible. It's about working with compliance teams to establish these pathways before an incident, creating templates for emergency change documentation, defining criteria for bypassing approval chains, and having clear validation processes in place. They give an example of a utility company that had a regulatory response package ready to go, which is a great example of proactive planning.
It's about being prepared for those emergency situations, not letting compliance become a roadblock.
The article wraps up by highlighting some fundamental questions that organizations need to consider. How do you maintain testing rigor without sacrificing response time? How do you balance regulatory compliance with the urgency of a security threat?
These are tough questions.
They emphasize the importance of addressing these questions before an incident occurs, as this leads to greater resilience. They highlight a manufacturing client with a dedicated emergency testing environment, allowing them to test changes quickly without cutting corners.
And when it comes to balancing compliance and urgency, the key is to really understand the regulations. Often, they're more flexible than you might think.
The final message is that closing the response gap requires a cultural shift, going beyond technology. It's not just about tools, it's about mindset.
Absolutely. It's about accepting uncertainty and being comfortable acting on the best available information.
It's about valuing speed alongside accuracy, recognizing that a good decision now is better than a perfect decision later. It's about calibrating your testing to the threat context and rewarding proactive protection. And ultimately, it's about building a culture where security is dynamic and adaptive, where organizations are prepared to act decisively.
Well said.
So, this isn't just a technical chat, it's about the real-world pressures and trade-offs organizations face when the alarm bells ring. This response gap can be the difference between a near miss and a full-blown crisis.
It's about recognizing the human element in all of this, those ingrained processes and natural hesitation in the face of uncertainty.
But as we've explored, organizations can significantly reduce the potential damage and costs by adopting a more agile and risk-aware approach. They need to have clear protocols and a culture that embraces acting on the best available information. It really makes you think, doesn't it, about how prepared we all are for that dreaded 3 a.m. call.
It certainly does.
Well, we hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insights. Perhaps it's even sparked some ideas on how you might improve your own response capabilities.
Food for thought.
Thanks for bringing this important topic to our attention. Cheerio for now.